In this video, Jeff Booth explains why Bitcoin-backed loans, Bitcoin ETFs, and stablecoins are all a fool's game. Either we use Bitcoin as money or we lose. Link to the full video in the description below.
I try to simplify things, and I say if Bitcoin fails as a medium of exchange, it will fail as a currency, as a store of value. Just as a simple. And here's the thing I know: Bitcoin will not fail as a medium of exchange. And so how I look at, and I can totally appreciate somebody wanting to attract more Bitcoin and measure in the US dollar and leverage against that. And I realize that most people pricing in Bitcoin or pricing in the US dollar are actually through that action because they're not holding their own Bitcoin. They're not spending in Bitcoin. They're holding it as a store of value only, and they're pricing it in the US dollar. They're essentially a trader, right? And one day they're going to sell their Bitcoin for something else into in the US, measured in US dollars, and that's okay. It's going to happen anyways. But these two systems are incompatible, right? We've already determined the natural state of the free market is deflation, and the US-based system is inflationary. So the inflationary system has to centralize. Whether it attracts more Bitcoin on its balance sheet or in BlackRock's balance sheet or in MicroStrategy or anything else, it has to rely on inflation. And over time, if it centralizes more and more and more, and people, let's just use again two opposite ends of the spectrum, and then we can we don't have to yell at different people inside, but let's just go from first principles. If you have an inflationary system against productivity growth in the world, it has to eventually manipulate money. It has to centralize. People won't see it, and if you're in the derivative instrument instead of Bitcoin, if you have your money on an exchange or somebody else's platform, it is not your Bitcoin. It is somebody else's Bitcoin, and it will likely be centralized and repriced on you at some point, or that company will probably get liquidated at some point because the natural state of the free market is deflation. And because you are inside that system and giving your energy to the system, you will probably underestimate that risk. Similar to the example I gave before, if you were in the bank that gave you a return by leveraging your gold, you would underestimate that risk. It has to centralize because it's based on a structure that has to centralize.
But does the centralization mean like confiscation? Like if you trust your coins to an exchange or you purchase through an ETF issuer, that the government eventually will be incentivized to just say, oh, this is my domain.
At some point, let's say at some point on that, because it has to continue to centralize. And if you continue to do that, and if let's just say everyone continued to do that, then Bitcoin layer 1 would be suppressed just like gold was suppressed by layer 2, because we wouldn't care about Bitcoin layer 1. We would care about the derivative instrument because that's what we would be spending in. And we would forget the innovation that this was decentralized and secure, and we would trust the centralized currency on top. And then you would play games from that centralized currency, just like you play games in gold. You would write derivatives contracts, and nobody would see the underlying because they wouldn't care. That could still have a massive rise in Bitcoin. If you're measuring in the US dollars, it could still have a staggering rise in Bitcoin as the US goes and tries to gain more of it, and other countries play game theory but it ends in a place that is centralizing.
So I know that this was more of a silly offhand comment by President Trump, but when he said that, we could pay off our debt using Bitcoin, do you see that as possible? Like to just clear our balance sheet of the debt that we owe because this is the best appreciating asset and
so
strong.
That means selling the Bitcoin at some point.
Yeah.
Right. And then what would that do? Right. So
Right.
So you could have your balance sheet that is more favorably impacted, but likely that inflationary monetary system has to drive more and more inflation. The US dollar is an inflationary debt-based system. So why would you do that instead of just printing more money?
So do you think that we will get a strategic Bitcoin reserve and that the government has some sort of plan in place to create a Bitcoin-backed dollar in the same way that we had the petrodollar, which countries are now moving away from?
Absolutely. So do I think that that's going to happen? Absolutely. I think that's going to happen. Somebody has to do that. There's going to be a nation state that does that. And I suspect that, because remember, Bitcoin is imposing this discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So the countries that go first, just like if you went first in Bitcoin, your money hasn't been devalued. You have more purchasing power. It goes further. Same
Yeah.
thing for any government buying. So they can provide more services to their citizens over time if they go early. Same for any county, same for any state, same for any country, same for El Salvador, same for every person. You don't have to wait for your country to do this. It's an open monetary network, bounded, secured by energy, and you just have to move your time, and you have the benefit. So of course, I suspect Trump is going to do this early in his presidency, because if he doesn't, then it's going to be a shit show for his presidency, because you're going to have to print so much money or have a deflationary spiral. And this is a way to essentially print the money into something that drives prosperity for U.S. citizens. And if he doesn't, some other countries will.
Is that because you're saying, I mean, right now things appear great on paper, the stock market's doing great, right? I mean, like, no recession, we soft landed, but actually there's something around the corner, and those misallocated resources are going to come due. And on the other side of it, we do need to strengthen our balance sheet with something like Bitcoin.
So the lack of liquidity, when I say liquidity, lack of printing money or interest rates, way lower interest rates that drive a massive funding, more debt, giant, massive debts. So when Powell just said he's not going to decrease interest rates as fast right now, so you have a liquidity tightening in the market, and people can feel that liquidity tightening in the market. It will roll over and cause a capitulation everywhere. Stock prices will U.S. dollar will go stronger, a lot stronger, other countries, other assets will sell off like crazy until there's a change in we're going to create liquidity. That liquidity for setting up for next year in Bitcoin, if you want to measure in US dollars, two things are going to happen. You're going to have right now you're facing this liquidity crunch, and at some point, like Larry Lepard's new book, The Big Print, might be launched just in time so you can read it before the big print.
Oh my gosh.
And so relative to that money being debased at a crazy rate, Bitcoin will go through the roof, and because it's also the only non-counterparty risk asset in the world, tethered to the other system, and there's going to be a supply crunch in it. You could see some fireworks next year in this, but by U.S. printing into that, they gain the benefit of the rise, right? Yeah. And so if they don't print into that, they don't gain the benefit of the rise. And so I suspect that is going to happen. I suspect that's going to happen early in Trump's term. Again, I can't say for sure, but if I'm measuring probabilities, it seems like the natural thing that they have to do. And if they don't, this is just game theory at a nation state level now, and somebody's going to do this.
Wow. So we are really early, the ones of us who are in it early. I just saw the other day, I think it's a company that Ego Death invests in, they tweeted that they now have 30 Bitcoin, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 30 Bitcoin, especially if you fast forward out, 10, 20 years, it's like companies are going to be announcing that they bought, 0.002 Bitcoin.
We have companies that are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet every single month. That they're growing so fast, they're so profitable that they're adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet every month, and it's staggering. I can't believe we get to do this, and most people don't even see it.
Yeah. I mean, to be able to have a whole Bitcoin, I think that's going to be extremely rare someday.